we see incredible opportunities. We can get very negative about what's going on in the world, the pandemic, and, all of these things, political instability. But God is using all of these things to open up very unusual doors to serve the people in those countries. Restricted access, we talk about restricted or creative access countries. It would seem at the outset that these countries are closed and there's no way to get in, but there, we had a mission leader who told us one time, if the door's closed, try the window. And that's what we have been doing. My wife and I have served not only in free countries, but in a number of restricted access countries. And the opportunities are unparalleled. It's just unbelievable what all we can do. And the technology that God has given to us in this day and age to serve the Lord and to use as tools for evangelizing, discipling, and planting churches are phenomenal.
Well, welcome to Calvary Conversations. My name is Mike Dodds. I'm the director of CU Press, as well as the advisor for the Master of Divinity degree program here at Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. And today, our special guest is Dr. Paul Holritz. He's the academic vice president of the National Theological College and Graduate School. Welcome to the conversation, Paul.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mike. It's a privilege to be here.
Good. That's great. You and I met a number of years ago through an email first that came to Calvary. You sent to Calvary, probably a bunch of other schools too. It's looking for a professor who is able to teach a couple courses in Uganda. And I teach those courses here at Calvary. So I go, ooh, cool. And as they say, the rest is history. I went and taught that course in Uganda at your Uganda campus. But that sort of begs the question. Let's start out with filling in some details for our listeners. Tell us about NTCGS, the National Theological College and Graduate School. What is it? Why is it? Where is it? Those kinds of questions.
Sure. Well, NTCGS was birthed through the ministries of Piedmont Baptist College. It is no longer called by that name, but they had two campuses overseas, one in Bangladesh and then one in Cairo, Egypt. And because I was the executive vice president of the college, it was my responsibility to oversee accreditation and also teach a course or two at both of those campuses. Well, Piedmont kept that campus or that program for about 2 or 3 years, from 2002 to 2005, and then they did not feel they had the finances to subsidize it or to support it. So they did a teach out program. A board was formed, and NTCGS became an entity of its own, with its own board and a related mission agency called Baptist Equipping Nationals. So that's what began officially in 2006, though the ministry actually started in 2002 from Piedmont. We are located primarily in the Middle East. We are serving the countries of Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. And that's in the Middle East. And then Uganda started shortly before you came in 2015. Actually, East Africa, we are serving students in Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and the whole East Africa area. And our mission and purpose, Dr. Mike, is to teach, evangelize, based on 2 Timothy 2:2, to teach them to evangelize, to disciple, and plant churches among their own people and surrounding nations. And it's a privilege. We now have about 400 alumni who are serving in multiple countries throughout the Middle East and East Africa as well, including restricted access countries where we could never go. And so we are praising the Lord for the tremendous results of what God alone has done in and through this school over the last 20 years.
Yeah, you mentioned Bangladesh.
Yes.
You're not there anymore?
Well, NTCGS is not there. I think Northwest Seminary is overseeing, well, what used to be Northwest Seminary. It is now under Corbin, but they have a graduate program there that I believe is ongoing still.
Okay.
And so we taught there a couple of times, but NTCGS has no relationship with that school.
Okay. Are there any places that you're envisioning going? I mean, this is not just one site. So maybe you've got your eyes on some
Yes.
other places, possibly?
Yes, we have been invited to a number of countries and locations. We have accreditation not only in the Middle East with what's called the Middle East North Africa Association of Theological Educators, but we are also accredited by ATA. Both of these accrediting agencies are under the umbrella of ISET. ISET is related to accrediting agencies in 70 countries. I believe they have 1,200 member schools. So we're also related in the Far East. That is, we are accredited in the Far East. And because of that, someone recently contacted us about the possibility of serving in that part of the world. And I just happened to have a conversation with that individual this week, and those conversations will be ongoing, but we haven't officially entered yet. We are looking forward to that possibility in the future, God willing.
Well, that's great. That's neat. Um, in your school's website, I found the statement here, equipping nationals is the most effective way to do missions today. Now, other mission organizations would maybe take issue with that statement. So
Mm.
why did you all feel that that's not only a truism, but your focus?
Yes, I think it depends on a couple of things here. Number one, how long has missions been in a particular country or region of the world? If they have been there for decades, maybe even centuries, and not seen effective results, part of the reason why is because the local leadership has not been trained and it's just not working. Now, I'm a church planter by conviction and by calling. My wife and I started as church planters in the country of Japan. We planted 2 churches, intended to stay a lifetime there. Japan is one of the most difficult free world countries in which to plant a church. And yet God enabled our team to start 2 churches within a period of less than 20 years. Normally it takes 25 for one church to develop in that country. So I learned something through that experience. And had we not had that experience, I emphasize this, we don't say it's either or, but it's and both. In other words, you've got to have the boots on the ground. You've got to have people planting churches when a ministry first starts. And many times missionaries can do that sometimes more effectively at the initial stages of planting a church because they attract people naturally as foreigners. But when it comes to deep cultural problems, the nationals don't want to talk to you. They say you don't understand. You have not been a part of this culture. You're not anchored in it as long as you might have lived there. I lived 25 years in Japan, and yet I'm still considered an outsider there, even though I know the language well and the culture well. So what I'm saying is what we did, Dr. Mike, in Cairo, actually our program moved out to Alexandria. 5 years after we began that program, our men had started over 100 house churches or Bible studies. They can do it so much more effectively because they've got the culture. They don't have to learn the language. They don't have to raise great amounts of support. They can do it so much more effectively. And that has proven true not only in the Middle East, but it has also proven true in East Africa where we're serving. And I have had the privilege of training nationals in many, many countries around the world and found that this model is very effective.
Well, cool. But why do they need a degree? You know, you are a degree granting school. You talked about accreditation. That's exactly what we have to deal with here at Calvary. Why
Yes,
an undergraduate or a graduate degree? Why do they need that?
that is a very good question. There are 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons for this. In the Middle East, our men cannot be ordained by their respective organizations or their denominations unless they have credentials.
Hmm.
And so they need that degree. in order to be ordained and to serve in not only their country, but surrounding countries as well. In East Africa, one of our students now, he's the beginning of what we anticipate to be many more in the future, is planning to go into Rwanda. They would not allow him to go into this neighboring country until he could prove that he had credentials in theology. And so an accredited degree is very important. The governments are clamping down on the health and wealth and prosperity gospel, which has robbed these nations of tremendous resources. And so the governments are clamping down and saying, look, you know, our people need to be trained. They need to be discerning so that they can start their own churches and they can grow and they can move ahead. So, you know, some object to the fact that the governments are involved in this, and there are definitely pluses and minuses to that, but we can understand why they're doing this. And so therefore a degree is very important. So degrees are important to us, but that's not our primary passion. Our primary passion is to teach people to evangelize, disciple, and plant churches.
Okay, so it's a tool, a necessary tool.
Exactly.
In some countries. Can you give, you mentioned just real briefly a couple examples there of students. Could you maybe give a couple focused examples of, well, here was a student in this country and this is what he's doing, and it just help us to understand the impact that the school's been able to have.
Sure, I'll be glad to do that. Most recently in Syria, 5 of our graduates were ordained. Now, we cannot go into Syria. We cannot do that. It's impossible for us to go there. But these men and some women as well come across the border at great risk and take our training. And after 5 years, we have several men in various ministries, but I just want to think of one medical doctor whose clinic was bombed twice, just obliterated through, you know, the ongoing war that's there. But he rebuilt twice, and we asked him, why don't you leave? And he said, leave. He said, never has the door been so wide open to present the gospel in this country than it is now. We're not about to leave. And he was just ordained in the spring of this year. And he's going to keep his medical profession as a means of reaching others, but he wants to pastor a church. And so that is just one example. I think of another man who graduated in the spring as well. He started to work among a very unique people group in Syria, and started evangelizing, and his denomination refused to ordain him. But he was an effective servant of the Lord. And so he came, got our training. The church that he started a few years ago now has 2,000 people attending its church. It's under national leadership, but he wants to start another ministry among this very unique people group. Another outstanding example of this that I can think of is in the country of Lebanon, where one of our graduates planted a church in the most unlikely, very dangerous parts of the country bordering Syria. And he also started with just a handful of people. That church now has 130 people, and they are feeding, clothing, educating the children of 2,500 refugee families every week. Just a phenomenal ministry. My goodness, there are so many examples of this. I could go on and on, but that's just two.
I'll bet. Shoot, that primes the pump for other conversations there. We're missing a piece of the puzzle of our conversation, and that piece is your background. The school started, I heard you say, in 2002, but what were you doing before then? You were at Piedmont, I heard that. So help us understand Paul Holritz.
Sure. We first started out, my wife and I believed that God called us to the country of Japan for a lifetime to plant churches. You're familiar with the verse of scripture, the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And both of those are very important. God gave us a mind to use, to plan, to prepare for ministry and so forth. we had a plan of starting 7 churches in our lifetime on the island of Kyushu, the southernmost island of Japan. And we got into our 3rd term, and Kathy got very, very sick. They didn't know the cause of her, Kathy is my wife, they didn't know the cause of her illness. So finally, we had to medevac her. She became so weak that we could just barely get her on the plane. Brought her back here to the States. It took 2 years for the doctors to discover the cause of her illness, which happened to be parasites. Parasites not from the country of Japan, but from the US fast food restaurants where the meat is not cooked properly. And we had 4 little boys at that time. And of course, we frequented fast food chains on our way to meetings. So she got it, and we happened to be living in Atlanta, and we were referred to the CDC. They said it was one of the worst cases they had ever seen, treated her, and our doctors, to make a long story short, said she cannot return to Japan for at least 5 years. Well, by that time, our kids were in college. And so we waited on the Lord, and God directed us to serve as resident missionaries at a Christian college in Tennessee for 5 years. And then that led to our going to Piedmont to serve there as their executive president for another number of years. We got involved in teaching overseas, and the more we got involved in teaching overseas, instead of training North Americans for the harvest, just them, we began training national pastors and leaders overseas in multiple countries. And in 2009, we resigned the school and came full-time with Biblical Ministries Worldwide on loan to NTCGS, and the rest is history.
Oh, wow. Well, you hear the details, Paul, and I've not heard this before. I've heard snippets, but not put it together. God moved you sovereignly, like you were saying. We make our plans, but then the Lord had another step, and we need to be open to those other steps, even though they're painful to make at times.
Yes.
It's very frustrating. BMW, what do you do for BMW? You've got 2 hats on, NTCGS and BMW.
So we kind of serve in the educational wing of BMW, and that is we help to train, and we try to encourage others in our mission as well to be involved in this process. So we have several BMW missionaries who are involved in NTCGS on loan, like we are, to serve as educators in this process of church planting.
Cool, that's great. Take off your missions hats for a second here,
Sure.
NTCGS and BMW, because I've heard you travel all over the world. In fact, when I went to Uganda, it impressed me that it's almost like the stewardesses all knew you by name. You got on the airplane because you fly so
we
much.
had a kind of humorous experience. One day we were passing through Paris, and the lady at the counter looked at my ticket, and then she looked at my wife and she said, "Thank you for allowing your husband to live on our airplanes." So yes, we spend a lot of time on airplanes.
Shoot. All right. So you've seen a lot of the world. You've seen some specific parts of the world. There's others maybe that you'd have to say, I just don't know. But stepping back and just looking from a perspective that I and our listeners just don't have. What's the need? What's the opportunity? What are the challenges you see at this time for sharing the gospel around the world? I'm not thinking just missions. I'm just thinking church thinking. Got my church hat on. I just want to know what God's heart is and what the need is.
Yes.
What do you see?
Well, my father, I'm a 2nd generation missionary, Mike, and my father looks at what we are doing, and he's, believe it or not, still alive. He's almost 101 years old, still serving the Lord. And he looks at what we're doing and he said, "Oh, I am so envious. I wish I would have the kind of opportunities you have." So on the one hand, Dr. Mike, we see incredible opportunities. We can get very negative about what's going on in the world, the pandemic, and all of these things, political instability. But God is using all of these things to open up very unusual doors to serve the people in those countries. Restricted access, we talk about restricted or creative access countries. It would seem at the outset that these countries are closed and there's no way to get in, but there, we had a mission leader who told us one time, if the door's closed, try the window. And that's what we have been doing. My wife and I have served not only in free countries, but in a number of restricted access countries. And the opportunities are unparalleled. It's just unbelievable what all we can do. And the technology that God has given to us in this day and age to serve the Lord and to use as tools for evangelizing, discipling, and planting churches are phenomenal.
Yeah. You just say the challenges, and made me think of COVID here, and you run a school. How did you do that over there? Well, I heard you talk that you did some online, but that we here at Calvary, we do online, but we know the best is in class. So
Yes. Yes. There is no substitute, as you know, from your years in education to face mentoring, discipleship, teaching, instruction. But, we just in God and his sovereignty, about 2 years before the pandemic hit, we felt extremely burdened to get a learning management system to use as a supplement to our teaching. And it was all ready to go when the pandemic hit. So it was just very easy for us to make the transition. The technology was a challenge in some of our poorer countries, but it was still doable, and phenomenal that we could actually carry this on. Now we are using a blended approach now that the pandemic is not as severe and we're able to travel to these countries. We use a combination, primarily face-to-face teaching, but we give pre and post-modular assignments, as you know.
Right, yeah.
And we're able to do that through learning management system, through online study.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we take advantage of the opportunities as the Lord provides them. Well, Dr. Paul, how could our listeners know more about NTCGS and maybe your own personal ministry? How can they contact you? What would be some good ways?
Sure. They can visit our website, which is very simple. It's simply ntcgs.org. And by going there, you can find our contact information. We would be delighted to visit your church, present the ministry, and oh my goodness, so many stories that we could relate that challenge people and help them realize that in parts of the world where you think the Lord is not working, he's very much at work. And we are just thrilled to be a part of that. So feel free to look at our website. That's ntcgs.org. And you can get all of the contact information there necessary.
Great. For our listeners, that contact is in the email that you received, a link to this conversation today. Well, thank you, Dr. Paul Holritz, for sharing your vital ministry and your life with us today here concerning the National Theological College and Graduate School. And we want to thank our faithful listeners, too, for joining us for another Calvary Conversation. Well, have a good day in the Lord.
Yes, just want to add a little commercial here. I've had the privilege of speaking in chapel at Calvary and seeing the ministry through you primarily, Dr. Mike. We are so thankful for what you're doing. And we pray God's blessing on your ministry and that you'll be able to continue to train servants for the Lord here in North America.
You bet, and you the same. Thank you very much.
God bless you.
You all have a good day in the Lord.
Same to you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.